Tookie Williams. His story inspired the character Bobby Johnson in the 1992 film South Central, played by Glenn Plummer, a loyal Hoover Street deuce gangster whose life spirals into prison before taking an unexpected turn toward redemption.
But if you kill, there is no later on.
But as real as South Central felt, the truth behind Tookie Williams' life was far darker than what Hollywood showed. The movie softened the edges, painting Bobby Johnson as a man who made bad choices but still had pieces of his soul left intact. In reality, Tookie lived in a world far colder and far more brutal. There were no cinematic redemptions on the streets of Los Angeles in the 1970s. The real Williams didn't just get caught up in gang life, he helped create it. He was one of the architects of an era that would claim thousands of lives long after his own story ended. Tookie Williams was born in New Orleans in 1953, but by age 6, he and his teenage mother had moved to South Central Los Angeles, a place that to outsiders shimmered with a promise of sunshine and opportunity, but to residents felt like a trap. Williams once described it as a shiny red apple rotting away at the core, a perfect metaphor for a neighborhood where poverty, racism, and violence were daily realities. The streets were his teacher, and the first lesson was simple: be the predator or be the prey. He chose to dominate. By his teens, Williams had transformed himself into a walking tank of muscle and menace, nearly 300 pounds, arms like cannons, and a glare that could freeze anyone in their tracks. Fear became his currency and power his obsession. In 1971, he crossed paths with another young fighter named Raymond Washington. The two hit it off instantly, bonding over their shared hunger for respect and control. Together, they would create the Crips, a name that would soon echo through every corner of Los Angeles. Williams became the face of the West Side Crips, turning his faction into a force that controlled neighborhoods, extorted businesses, and waged war against rival crews. But what made him even more complex was his double life. While commanding one of the city's most dangerous gangs, he also spent time working as an anti-gang counselor for youth programs. To outsiders, it looked like he was trying to help. In reality, it was part of a contradiction that defined him, the predator who occasionally preached peace. Then came 1979, the year his empire turned to ashes. That February, a 7-Eleven clerk named Albert Owens was gunned down in cold blood during a robbery. Tookie ordered the man to lie face down before shooting him twice in the back, all for $120. Later on, one of his accomplices described how Tookie bragged about the murder, even imitating the dying sounds Owens made, laughing like it was nothing. Less than 2 weeks later, 3 more people were murdered at a Los Angeles motel. The Yang family, immigrants who ran a small business, executed just for $50. It was violence without meaning, and it shattered whatever illusion remained of Tookie's conscience. By 1981, he was convicted of 4 murders and sent to death row. Inside, he remained volatile, attacking guards, inmates, and anyone who crossed him. But isolation eventually broke something inside him. Over 6 years in solitary, Tookie claimed to have found enlightenment. He started reading everything he could get his hands on, from philosophy to religion, and began writing children's books warning against gang life. His turnaround gained international attention, earning him Nobel Peace Prize nominations.
Working together, we can put an end to this cycle that creates deep pain in the hearts of our mothers, our fathers, and our people who have lost loved ones to this senseless violence.
Ironically, the transformation mirrored South Central's Bobby Johnson, the hardened gangster who finds redemption behind bars and dedicates himself to saving his son from repeating his mistakes. But Tookie's real-life story ended without Hollywood closure. In 2005, after a wave of celebrity petitions and public appeals, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger denied his clemency, citing his lack of remorse and the weight of forensic evidence. Williams never apologized for the murders. On December 13, 2005, he was executed by lethal injection at San Quentin, maintaining his innocence to the end. Danta Rowsey. The cold, calculated malice of Danta Rowsey mirrors the chilling transformation of Bishop in the 1992 film Juice, a charismatic kid from the neighborhood who turns into a power-obsessed killer waiting to destroy anyone in his way. But while Bishop's story was a gripping piece of fiction, Danta Rowsey's reality was much more disturbing. What Tupac Shakur portrayed on screen was intensity. What Rowsey did in real life was pure terror. The movie stopped where morality began to fade, but Rowsey's life never found that stopping point. The streets of Milwaukee don't usually get mentioned in conversations about organized violence, but Rowsey turned them into a personal battlefield. He was associated with a small, aggressive outfit known as the Uptown Street Boys. Not a massive gang like the Crips or Bloods, but ruthless enough to make their name feared. By 2011, Rowsey had already built a reputation as someone who didn't panic under pressure. He was strategic, manipulative, and according to prosecutors, extraordinarily ruthless. Everything started on December 13, 2011, when Rowsey and a few associates, Israel Gatlin, Irvin Buddha Hale, and Marvin Sanders, carried out a robbery that went horribly wrong. A man named Joseph McGriff Jr. ended up dead. Most criminals in that situation would lay low, maybe flee town or try to shift blame. Rowsey did the opposite. He started killing off anyone who could potentially turn him in. It began 3 weeks after the robbery, when he had Buddha Hale murdered because he feared Hale might talk. Then came Gatlin, who was executed 6 months later for the same reason. By the time Rowsey orchestrated the shooting of a third man, Emmanuel Carter, in 2013, a witness who survived but was left paralyzed, it was clear that Rowsey wasn't just cleaning up loose ends, he was asserting dominance. The psychological element is what made Rowsey's case so chilling. Like Bishop and Juice, he became addicted to power. Once he had it, he couldn't let it go. In the movie, Bishop's descent begins after he kills Raheem. He starts to believe he's untouchable, that fear equals respect. Rowsey lived that exact mindset. But as with all stories of domination, paranoia crept in. By late 2013, Marvin Sanders, the last surviving member of the original crew, realized he was next. Instead of waiting to die, Sanders went to the police. His testimony blew the case wide open, exposing Rowsey's entire 2-year campaign of witness elimination. After a 10-day trial, the jury took 90 minutes to convict him. The courtroom atmosphere was described as eerie. Even seasoned detectives admitted they'd never seen a street criminal operate with such calculated cruelty. The judge called it one of the most ruthless witness intimidation cases in Milwaukee's history. Rowsey was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences plus 35 years, guaranteeing he would never see the outside world again. Zé Pequeno. His story inspired the cold-blooded antagonist Lil Zé from the 2002 Brazilian film City of God, the boy who rose from a petty thief to a terrifying, hyper-violent drug lord.
Dadinho caralho, meu nome agora é Zé Pequeno, porra.
But what the movie didn't capture was just how horrifying Zé Pequeno's real life was. The film was dark, yes, but the reality behind it was much more disturbing. José Eduardo Barreto Conceição, better known by his nickname Zé Pequeno, was born in Rio de Janeiro in 1957 and raised in the infamous Cidade de Deus favela. The neighborhood was supposed to be a government housing project, a place to relocate families from the city's overcrowded slums and give them a better life. But what started as hope quickly turned into a dumping ground of poverty and desperation. Gangs took root, drugs became currency, and children grew up faster than they should have, because if they didn't, they wouldn't grow up at all. Zé's story started like many others in the favela. He was just another kid hustling, stealing, and trying to make something out of nothing. But from early on, there was something different about him. He had a cruel streak that other kids didn't. He didn't just rob, he hurt people. He didn't just want power, he wanted control. His childhood nickname was Dadinho, or Little Dice. But there was nothing playful about him. When he was barely 12 years old, he carried out one of the most disturbing acts ever recorded in the area, a mass killing at a motel. He shot and killed multiple people inside for no real reason. Witnesses said he laughed through it. That moment set the tone for who he would become. As he got older, Dadinho turned that raw, unpredictable violence into strategy. He joined the local drug trade and eventually decided to reinvent himself. Through an Afro-Brazilian spiritual ritual, he took on the name Zé Pequeno, Lil Zé. It wasn't just a name change, it was a transformation. Zé became obsessed with power. He moved like a warlord, running Cidade de Deus like his personal kingdom. His control was total. Ironically, once he took over, the favela became safer because all other crime stopped. But that peace came from fear. Nobody dared cross him. Zeb Pequeno was infamous for recruiting kids, sometimes as young as 9, to serve as his eyes and hands in the drug trade. He trained them to kill without hesitation, rewarding loyalty with guns and cash. He wanted people, even children, to worship and fear him at the same time. His reign reached its peak when he clashed with rival Mané Galina, known in the film as Knockout Ned. What started as a street rivalry turned personal after Zay attacked him and assaulted his girlfriend. From there, the favela turned into a war zone. The film City of God portrayed these events with shocking accuracy, but even then, it couldn't show the full weight of Zay's insanity. The character Lil Zeb made steak and fries kill another child to prove loyalty, a direct reflection of Zeb Pequeno's methods. But real life didn't end neatly. There was no dramatic last shootout like in the film. On Christmas Day 1985, Zeb Pequeno was killed by members of a rival faction, the Valzinho Gang. He was only 28. Michael Fatback Winters. His story inspired one of the most memorable characters in the 1991 classic Boys in the Hood. Darren Doughboy Baker, played by Ice Cube, the gangster who never left home, whose loyalty to his block ultimately cost him everything.
Get on, mama's boy. Get him, Joe. Get him, Joe. Hey.
Michael Fatback Winters wasn't just some random inspiration either. He was actually the childhood best friend of John Singleton's own best friend, making his presence deeply personal to the film's creation. But while Doughboy's story hit audiences hard, the real-life Michael Winters lived a much rougher, more chaotic existence than the movie could ever show. Michael grew up deep in the heart of South Central Los Angeles, around 101st Street and Vermont Avenue, right in the center of Hoover Crip territory. The area in the late 70s was a war zone disguised as a neighborhood, a place where kids learned about street codes before they even understood school lessons. His life took a turn in 1979 when he met John Singleton in 6th grade. Singleton had just moved into the neighborhood, wide-eyed and cautious, and it was Fatback who showed him how to move right. Singleton would later describe him as loud, bold, and unapologetically himself, the kind of guy who spoke his mind even if it got him in trouble. At just 12 years old, Michael claimed his street identity. He started calling himself Fatback, proudly repping the 107 Hoover Crips. He didn't see himself as a victim of the streets, he saw himself as a soldier in it. His notebooks were filled with gang tags and hand-drawn symbols. While other kids wrote their dreams, Fatback wrote his allegiance. By his teenage years, he was fully active, smoking, drinking, hustling, fighting, and living by that rule that violence was simply part of the territory. Meanwhile, Singleton took a completely different route. While Fatback stayed loyal to the block, Singleton focused on school, eventually landing at USC Film School. But despite walking different paths, the two stayed close. Fatback was the real-world example of the kid who could never leave his environment behind even if he wanted to. In a 1991 interview, he expressed his mindset perfectly. "It's my block, it's my street, and my name's written out there in the cement." To him, that meant everything. When Singleton wrote Boys in the Hood, he deliberately shaped Doughboy's character as the embodiment of that trapped loyalty, the friend who's too real for his own good. While Trey, the film's protagonist, finds a way out, Doughboy stays grounded, literally and emotionally, in the same neighborhood that raised and destroyed him. Singleton once said Doughboy represented the son she doesn't love enough, and he becomes a gangster. In the movie, Doughboy's final act of revenge, killing the men who murdered his half-brother Ricky, was his most human moment. It was love expressed through violence, a twisted kind of loyalty. But just like the real Fatback, the loyalty was a curse. The film's ending revealed that Doughboy was murdered 2 weeks later, a haunting piece of text that felt fictional until you realized it was echoing real life. Michael Fatback Winters never got a Hollywood ending. He stayed close to Singleton until his death in 2018. Raymond Washington. His story inspired the cold and calculating Ray Dewitt in South Central, a cunning leader who manipulates loyalty and controls young soldiers from the shadows.
All right, now I got a good market, so I need good stuff. All right, so don't lift no junk.
But the real Raymond Washington story went far beyond what the movie hinted at. In real life, Washington's world was far more chaotic, bloody, and unpredictable. The streets he ruled were nothing like the controlled cinematic version. They were alive with constant tension. Born in Los Angeles in 1953, Raymond grew up on East 76th Street in South Central. He wasn't born into wealth or comfort. His childhood was rough, filled with fights and scraps, but what set him apart was his raw charisma and his sense of fairness, at least by street standards. Washington didn't like guns. To him, shooting someone from a distance wasn't strength, it was cowardice. At just 5'8", he became known for settling disputes with his fists. If you could fight, you earned respect. If you couldn't, you learned. That code of honor shaped how he built his empire. By the late 1960s, Washington had organized his friends into a small street crew. Not yet a gang, more like a family of fighters defending their block. But he saw the potential for something bigger, something unified. In 1971, he met Stanley Tookie Williams, and together they merged their crews, creating what would soon become the Crips. What started as a street brotherhood quickly evolved into Los Angeles' first major black street gang.
How did Cripping start, based on your experience?
Raymond M. founded the Crips in '69. But a lot of times people say, oh, they spring soft to this or that. They were just a group of men, but they were dormant.
For a while, Washington was the face of strength and leadership in South Central. But as the Crips spread, so did the violence. By 1974, he was convicted of second-degree robbery and sent to prison. While he was away, the Crips' identity began to mutate, splintering into dozens of sets and neighborhoods. When Washington got out in 1976, he barely recognized the world he'd helped create. Guns were everywhere, and the new generation of Crips had no loyalty to the old codes. He was shocked by the chaos. The empire he built had become a war zone. Unlike Tookie, Washington didn't seem to want fame or influence anymore. He tried to keep his distance, realizing he no longer had control. But the streets never forget their kings, and power, once lost, breeds envy. On August 9, 1979, Raymond Washington was shot and killed on a corner of South Los Angeles. Witnesses said the killer was someone he knew, someone close. His death sent shockwaves across the city, with many comparing it to a presidential assassination. That murder would later become the seed of one of the deadliest rivalries in Los Angeles, the Crips versus the Hoover criminals. In South Central, Ray Ray represents that same manipulative power Washington once wielded, the leader who preys on the youth to build his empire. He recruits Bobby Johnson's son, Jimmy, pushing him into crime under the illusion of brotherhood. It's a perfect parallel to the real Washington, whose empire of loyalty and respect turned him into an uncontrollable beast of greed and violence. Kenneth Supreme McGriff. His story inspired the character unique from Power Book 3, Raising Kanan, the calm, calculated Queens drug boss who runs his operation like a corporation.
I got my eye on you.
But while Unique was a stylish TV villain with charisma and presence, Kenneth Supreme McGriff's real life was way colder and far more cutthroat. Supreme's world was built on paranoia, blood, and business, the kind of empire where loyalty was temporary and trust didn't exist past the next transaction. McGriff was born in South Jamaica, Queens in 1995. Unlike many street legends, he didn't grow up in total poverty. His parents worked for the New York City Transit Department, a decent, working-class family. But Supreme was drawn to what the streets offered, the fast life, the money, the respect. He got involved with 5% Nation, a group that blended religion with street culture, and it was there that he picked up the name Supreme. By the early 1980s, as crack New York like a bomb, Supreme founded the Supreme Team, a highly organized, militarized drug enterprise based in the Baisley Park housing projects. While other crews moved sloppy, Supreme ran his operation like a CEO. The structure was corporate, from lookouts to distributors to top enforcers. Every position had a purpose. At their peak in 1987, they were making over $200,000 a day. But with that kind of money came heat. The team controlled their turf with violence that was both strategic and excessive. Supreme installed rooftop lookouts with walkie-talkies across Baisley Park, setting up a real-time alarm system that alerted his dealers the second cops rolled in. It was military precision in the middle of a housing project. Nobody moved without Supreme's word. Movies and shows often make guys like Unique look untouchable, but the reality was constant tension. People flipped, informants appeared, enemies grew inside and out. Supreme's world was always one wrong move away from collapse. His downfall came when federal agents started connecting him to murders, major drug runs, and interstate trafficking. In 1989, he was convicted for running a continuing criminal enterprise and hit with 12 years in prison. But even behind bars, the operation didn't stop. His nephew and second-in-command, Prince Miller, kept the business alive, making it even more violent. After Supreme got out in 1997, he came back sharper and more calculated. He wasn't chasing street-level money anymore. He wanted to move big weight. Partnerships with other East Coast networks. But his reputation caught up to him. In 2007, after a long federal investigation, he was convicted of racketeering, drug trafficking, and most importantly, 2 murder-for-hire hits, paying $50,000 to have rivals Eric E. Moneybag Smith and Troy Singleton killed. That sealed his fate. Kenneth Supreme McGriff was sentenced to life in federal prison with no chance of parole. Al Munday. His story inspired Tommy Burns Brown, the ruthless yet magnetic kingpin played by DMX in the 1998 cult classic Belly. But while the movie painted a stylized picture of street life, the real man behind that character, Alfred Al Munday Cleveland, lived a story with no glamour. It was darker, uglier, and soaked in the kind of violence that leaves nothing cinematic behind, only trauma, blood, and time served. Munday didn't grow up poor. That's the part that throws people off. According to court records, he was raised in a respectable neighborhood in Jamaica, Queens. His father was doing well enough to own a big home, something rare for the area at the time, and he provided his son with things most kids in the block couldn't dream of: nice clothes, gifts, even credit cards. He wasn't supposed to end up in the streets, but the streets had a magnetism that was hard to resist. Like many young men in Queens during early 1980s, Munday got pulled in by the adrenaline. It started small: car theft, flipping stolen parts, hustling. But the rush was addictive. Soon he graduated from small-time hustles to the more lucrative and dangerous drug game. He had ambition, and by the time the crack era exploded, he was already positioning himself to be more than just another corner boy. By the late 80s, Munday teamed up with some close associates, including John Shaquem Bayo Edwards, the same man later believed to have inspired the character Knowledge in Belly. Together, they made a bold move that set them apart from the usual Queens crews. Instead of fighting over turf in the crowded New York market, they decided to take their business somewhere untouched: Lorain, Ohio. It was a small blue-collar town near Cleveland, and at that time, it was wide open. They flooded the area with crack cocaine and took control of the local trade. Locals would later say that from 1988 to 1991, Munday's crew had Lorain on smash. They were the law, the suppliers, and the executioners, all rolled into one. But behind that scenes was a level of brutality that went way beyond the cold professionalism shown in Belly. Munday's operation didn't just rely on intimidation, it relied on fear. And when someone crossed that line, the punishment was fatal. The defining event that ultimately took down the entire crew was the murder of a woman named Marsha Blakely in 1991. Blakely was a known crack user who had fallen into debt with a crew. What happened to her was so gruesome it still chills anyone who reads the case file. Witnesses said Munday and his men confronted her in an apartment, where they beat her for 20 minutes straight. When she lost consciousness, they dragged her out, drove her to an alley, slashed her throat, and ran her over with a car. One witness claimed Munday later bragged about taking care of the junkie. It didn't take long for police to connect the dots. Munday and 3 others were indicted for aggravated murder, becoming known locally as the Ohio Four.
Would have become known as the Ohio Four were convicted of the murder of Marsha Blakely. They were also suspected in the murder of her roommate Floyd Epps, based on a witness account saying Blakely was tortured and killed because she owed the 4 men money for drugs.
But there was a problem. The case against them was built on air. The prosecution's entire story rested on one witness, a crack-addicted hustler named William Avery Jr., who came forward right after a cash reward was announced. Avery told investigators he'd seen the whole thing, and that was enough for prosecutors desperate to close a case that had horrified the small community. When Munday's trial began, his defense team presented an airtight alibi. The night Avery claimed Munday was in Ohio orchestrating the killing, Munday had actually checked in with his parole officer in Queens, 500 miles away. But the jury didn't care. The drug stigma, the image of a violent New York dealer, and the fear of letting a killer walk free outweighed logic. In 1996, Al Monday was convicted of aggravated murder and sentenced to life in prison. Unlike Tommy, Buns, and Belly, Monday didn't get to walk toward redemption or the light of faith. He sat behind bars for 25 years, insisting on his innocence. Then the twist came. Years later, the key witness, William Avery Jr., recanted everything. He admitted under oath that he had lied, that he never saw the murder, never witnessed anything. He said he fabricated the story for reward money and out of fear because he owed Monday money for drugs. By the time he told the truth, the damage was done. Monday had already lost decades of his life. In 2020, Al Monday was released on parole, but the case still haunts the justice system. His co-defendant remains locked up, fighting for the same truth Monday eventually got recognized, the fact that the case was built on lies. The most haunting part, though, is that the murder of Marsha Blakely remains unsolved.